Good evening, class. We're so glad to have you joining us. And we have been working our way through the tribes, who they were, where did they settle in Israel, where did they go, and where have their descendants ended up today. And so today we are looking at the tribe of Asher. And if you are watching online, if you will look, hopefully if you will look down from below where you are watching, you will see that you can print the notes. And so those notes should be there. And if they aren't, we will get them up as quickly as possible. I want to give some background to the tribe of Asher. The Anglo-Saxon invaders, and many people probably listening tonight and even sitting in front of me are of Anglo-Saxon descent. And the Anglo-Saxon invaders of Britain consisted of many Scandinavian and northern tribes groups. And these tribes groups, among whom a segment of people called Vandals were important. Now that's not the Vandals that like to go around and punch holes in your tires. That's not. These were a people group. And the Vandals came from just north of the Black Sea. So if you want to take a look at your map now, sometime later, they came from that area just north of the Black Sea, and they by the Don River. And you have several different maps there, and some probably show it a little bit more succinctly than others. So perhaps the map you have that shows Israel's wanderings shows a little more detail of that. And so just north of the Black Sea. So they came from that area. Now the Vandals in the 1st century AD, that would be the years that begin 100, 101, 102 AD. They had been known as Lygian. Sometimes they're called Lugians, and sometimes they're called Luigi or Luigi. And they were located near the upper Vistula River. And in this area, as the Vandals were obviously moving and they were migrating, they absorbed a Celtic group. So there was a Celtic group there. And when they moved in, they quickly overtook them, and then they intermarried with them, and then pretty soon what happened? Well, they just absorbed them. And Burgundians, and the reason why I am not, someone asked me, so were you supposed to remember all these people groups? No, not unless you want to. But what I want you to be able to do is if you want to look on your own, then you have some things to look up. You can plug in, search for Burgundians, and you can see where they were, where they went, who they were. So Burgundians, Veneti, and Lugians, all associated with the Vandals. So they, at some point in their migrations, these people groups associated with the Vandals. As they migrated, we'd like to kind of have fellowship with you. And so they did, and they began to be associated with them. Well, they also once were in the area of the upper Vistula River. So what can we see? Something that we've seen over and over again with other tribes. As they migrate, even though they may migrate at different times, they end up where? Usually same place, close to each other. So in Western France, we see an important and powerful group of people by the same name. And they're called the Veneti. Veneti. and they show up, they disappear. This is what I want to show you. They disappear in one area, they migrate, and all of a sudden, here's a people group that just happens to appear from nowhere in France, and they're called the Veneti. And these people, eventually, now they're going to go from France, and they move to Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. They're still on the move. I would say to you, they are on the move because God said a long, long time ago, he said, I will scatter you. I will scatter you to the uttermost part of the earth. But in you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. He continues to scatter them. So they don't stop in France. They move to Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. So now let's look at Genesis 46:17. The sons of Asher were Jimnah, Ishua, Iswi, Bariah, and Sarah, their sister. And right away, you know something about Surah or Sarah. Okay? Because that could be Sarah or Surah, or why? Because in Hebrew, it would be spelled the same way, whether it's Sarah or Surah or Sarah. You're going to see that change as it goes on. Their sister. And the sons of Beriah were Heber and Malchiel. So a portion, in note 1, a portion of the Veneti either went directly from Gaul, which is modern day France, to Donegal. Anybody ever hear about Donegal? You should have, because it's in northwest Ireland. So you have a portion. Again, remember what I said about these people groups? They all don't migrate at the same time. They all don't end up in the same place at the same time. And they were known or as Veneti Venicones, moved there from Wales. So remember what I said to you? They all don't migrate at the same time, and they all don't follow the same path, but they eventually end up together. So some of them moved directly from France or Gaul to Donegal in Ireland. And some of them had already migrated earlier, and they had came as Veneti Venicones, moved there from Wales. So before they got to Ireland, they lived in Wales. They didn't come from France. They went to Wales, and then from Wales went there. And they became the Veneti of Donegal. So there seems to be a connection between the Veneti of Donegal and the name of Irish groups known as Feni. If you ever visit Ireland, this is a big name, Feni. And that word means band or union. In other words, what? Band of brothers, union. Now, the name of a grandson of Asher is Heber, or Heber, but we would recognize that as Heber. And guess what? So Feni in Ireland means band or union. The name Heber in Hebrew means band or union. So see, there are some things that are still in their DNA. They're traveling and they're going, and they end up, think about it, back in Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria. Heber meant band or union. And here's a tribe that as they travel and as they migrate, there's something that's stuck in them about the importance of being a band or being a union in their tribe. And so they eventually end up in Ireland, where the word Feni, they called themselves that. Other people put that on them, maybe because they banded together. They were very strong in that band or union. and means the same thing, band or union. Now the ancestor of the Connacht and other Gaelic people of Ireland was named Hyber. I mean, I can see a connection. And I would tell you, Hyber and Heber are spelled identically in Hebrew, because Hebrew is a consonant language. It's not. It has the vowel points were added later, which in Hebrew is an acceptable alternative for Heber. So in Hebrew, it can be Heber, it can be Hyber. So they end up with something that still reminds them of their history. Through generation after generation after generation, and movement and migration. Now, the Lygian Vandal tribes by the Vistula River in Eastern Europe were the Boroi, the Omani, and the Hysi. And if you look at these names and understand there's going to be some change as they migrate and go through different places, and people will pronounce letters differently, pronounce sounds differently, and they will try to then stamp a name on these people. But you will see that these names are similar to those of the sons of Asher. Okay? Boroi, form of Beriah. Okay? Jimna, Ishua, and Iswi. Now, several factors serve to equate the Israelite tribe of Asher with the Vandals, Vandals, as with other people groups. So they're going to intermingle, they're going to intermarry, and you're going to have some other people groups coming out of them. But in addition to sons, Asher also had a daughter, Surah. Now, the sons of Beriah were Heber and Malchiel, Amalchiel. We were looking at that in Genesis 46:17. Now, the sons of Asher seem to be the tribes of the Lygian Vandals, so the sons of Asher. So Jimna became the Omani, O-M-A-N-I. And by the way, I worked, when I was at Bowling Green University, I worked in a restaurant called the Amani. And guess what? That name, and I don't want to say I think I know, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but it has the same meaning. It means a family, friends bonding, union, same thing, band. And basically it was supposed to be a restaurant where you could come and band together, and the Amani. Iswi became the Hysi, and Beriah the Boroi. B-O-R-E-O-I, Boroi. Actually, it's not really Boroi, it's a little bit, but I'm not Boroi, so I can't pronounce it exactly correctly. So I call it Boroi. So now the Vandals, more than likely, okay, people we call Vandals, were more than likely were the Vanes who had dwelt beside the Don River in southern Scythia. So in your Scythia map, you should be able to know where they were. Okay, this whole area is Scythia. Okay? And the Don River is right here. This little light river just above the Black Sea. And they came from here, and they eventually migrated to Sherry's favorite country, Scandinavia. Actually, area. Okay, they moved to Scandinavia. And the Vanes had first warred with them. So we know the Vanes warred with the Vandals, and then joined with the Assyr people group. So they're joining, and I keep repeating this so you'll understand. They did not realize they were warring and fighting with brothers. And so the Assyr, like the Vanes, were to become ancestors to part of the Scandinavians, Scandinavians. So the Assyr, just like the Vanes became part of the Scandinavians. Well, so did the Assyr. Now, AS, the letters AS in Phoenician Hebrew was a shortened form for Asher. A-S-H-E-R. Unless you think that that's so unusual. How many have ever heard people have a name and people eventually they grasp onto maybe initials or two letters? And they go, oh, da-da. And everybody knows who you're talking about because you've all decided to have a particular this thing. Sometimes you just put on you put on letters. And I remember a certain time growing up, people had letters, and that's all. I had an aunt who loved to do that. She just put all these letters. So the Assyr, so the Phoenician Hebrew was the dialect, and this is what's important. It was the dialect employed by the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Now, what am I saying? Phoenician Hebrew, it was Hebrew, but because of their proximity to Phoenicia and the influence of the Phoenicians, what happened is you have a kind of a blending. This can be seen in what I would call border states between the south and the north. There are some border states there. And actually, Virginia is kind of a border state in that sense. So, if you go deep, what the deep south is, then you'll get a y'all. In Virginia, it's y'all, but it's kind of y'all. It's a little more blended than it would be in Ohio if you're trying to act like a Virginian. In Ohio, you'd say you all. And by the way, the Apostle Paul must have been somewhere in there because he said, I thank my God, I pray in tongues more than you all. But as you move down, it gets a little bit more blended, a little more cut. Well, in the same way, what happened is you have the northern tribes. They are far. They have moved. And remember, the very first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, Jeroboam, did everything in his power to kind of isolate and separate the northern tribes, even from going to Jerusalem the 3 times of the year when they were required to go. And so he said, well, it's just too far to go. It's just much more convenient, and we'll even set up two places where you can go to worship, and you won't have to make that trip from the northern kingdom back to Jerusalem 3 times a year. And so he set up the first golden calf at Dan and the second at Bethel, house of God. So you can understand how it happened. So if they're not going, and remember, they just started drip. They didn't do it. And about the only time, anytime anyone came from the northern kingdom of Israel to Jerusalem, as if there was revival going on in Judah, and many of them said they came to him out of different tribes. And the Bible will name those tribes. And they said they fell to him out of these tribes because what? There was revival of righteousness going on in Jerusalem at that time under a good king. The northern kingdom of Israel never had a good king, never had a good king after the division of the kingdom. And Judah did this number, up and down, good king, bad king, good king, bad king. Well, they had a good king. When they had a good king, guess what happened? He would bring the people back to worshiping God, and there would be revival. Well, there were those from the northern kingdom that said, hey, we really want to be where God's presence is, so we're going to go. Some of them came and went back. Others came and never went back, which is why in the exile of the southern kingdom of Judah, you will also see representatives of the other tribes. Why? Because they would have come sometime for revival and said, we're not going back. You know, we've tasted and seen that the Lord's presence is good. We're not going back. So that's why they employed this dialect, because they were highly influenced by the Phoenicians. So they forgot the Hebrew and had kind of a blend of Phoenician Hebrew. Now, the Asir are also considered by most scholars to be equated with the Ansis. And they became the ruling elite among the Goths, Goths. And I want you to keep remembering things that God said to these people. He said that you were made, I've made you, not to be the tail, but what? To be the head. So wherever they would go, they would seem to rise, and here it is. The Ansis became a ruling elite among the Goths. And the Goths and Vandals spoke the same language. That becomes, again, that's a kind of a significant thing, because they migrate at different times, some of them from different places, and then when they begin to merge together, they say, oh, that language is the same language we speak. We understand you. And they are considered different branches of the very same people. The Goths and the Vandals. Any questions? Okay, the Vandals had first appeared south of the Burgundians, and the Burgundians were south of where the Goths had been on the Baltic Sea coast. Okay, so which is kind of an interesting thing. And east of the Vistula River. Okay? So the Vandals were led by two leaders named Ambri and Assi. And the name Ambri can be seen in the names of the Ambram, Imbri, and Yimbri people groups of Scandinavia. So there are people groups you find in Scandinavia, and they're called Ambram, Imbri, and Yimbri. Again, I would say to you, if you remove the vowels, you will see that basically they are the same word or same construction, word construction in Hebrew as Ambri. They were descendants of Jimna or Yimna, son of Asher. For example, you can take the name of Lord in Hebrew, which technically and literally was probably pronounced Yahweh. But we pronounce it Yahweh because it's kind of, the way we pronounce it is kind of half Hebrew and half anglicized. Actually was with vowel sounds. But it's Yahweh. But in English, how does it appear? Jehovah. Jehovah. So when you're looking at these names and say, well, how does that happen? And then go back and realize, transliterated Yahweh, Y-A-H-W-E-H. And by the way, that's why when you see anything transliterated from Hebrew, from Exodus, where Moses says to the voice out of the burning bush, what is your name? And God responds, I am that I am, taking the Hebrew letters of I am that I am, Yud He Vav He. Yud He Vav He, which looks like YHWH, again, transliterated. No vowel sounds till the Masoretic text came, and they put the A and the E there, so you get Yahweh or Yahweh, and then it goes into English, and we get Jehovah. It's all the same. Going back to the root Yud He Vav He, I am that I am. I know, TMI, but that becomes important, and if you will see that, then you can say, okay, I'm beginning to see it now. These are the same people groups, same name, it just goes through all these different pronunciations and forms. So all know about Jimna, Yimna, son of Asher. Okay, so the name of Assi is the same as that of the people of Assi. They were recorded, strangely enough, as once having conquered the Goths. So they conquered the Goths. We know that the Goths were also a part of, there was a section of Goths attached to the tribe of Gad. And they once conquered the Goths in East Scythia. So your map in East Scythia would be this area east of the Caspian Sea. So they once were here. Well, who do we know was once there? The tribes of Israel, particularly part of the tribe of Asher. After that, after being in East Scythia, they moved to the Don River region prior, so they moved to the Don River region, so they were over here, and they're migrating, and remember they're migrating on foot, cart, and they're not getting on a 747 flying. So it's going to take them a while. They would stop, but they started in this area, and they go all the way over here. So they were migrating how? Northward. 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 They are migrating northward. Now we're going to get into something very interesting. These people, then, as they moved northward and ended up over in this area, they become known as the Asir. A-S-E-I-R. Again, what do you see? The A-S. And the Asir don't stop here. They don't stop here. They're going to continue to move. And they migrated to Scandinavia. S-C-A-N-D-I-N-A-V-I-A. So the names Az and Asir are, now this is where you say, well, where's Asher? Right here. The names Az and Asir are Northern Kingdom of Israel, Hebrew versions of the name Asher. A-S-H-E-R. And remember, the Northern Kingdom of Israel Hebrew was highly influenced by the Phoenician alphabet. Oh, which should have some meaning for us who are English speakers, but I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, up to this point. Okay, in note 10, the Vandals were a federation. Now, how many are seeing something now? Band, union, federation. Okay, they were a federation. So we see the Vandals were a federation that included the Vandili, the Varnini, the Goths, and the Burgundians. So all these people groups, when they came together, began to form a federation. Why? Well, because they were told that they were a tribe that evidently had to always band together. So the Burgundians settled in France. They settled in France. They also settled in Switzerland. Switzerland. France and Switzerland. They were also known, and we know this by archaeology, we know it by language, we know it by artifacts that have been found, that they were known to be on the Swedish Isle of Bornholm. We know that from basically what has been found there. Now the French speak, so Switzerland, what do we know about the languages of Switzerland? They are what? Yes, French and also German. German and Switzerland as well. So the French-speaking people among the Swiss, S-W-I-S-S, and in answer to the question you haven't answered, yes, Swiss cheese does come from Switzerland. Yes. It's not something that's just made up. And we have a little Switzerland of Ohio, right? Not too far from us. They are linked, by the way, the French-speaking Swiss are linked to the Burgundians. In other words, they are, if they speak French in Switzerland, they're saying they are descendants of the Burgundians. The Burgundians descended from Beriah, son of Asher. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Beriah, his name may be pronounced as Beriah or Beriah or Veriog. Now for how many, if you took Hebrew, raise your hand. Okay, if you have not taken Hebrew, raise your hand. Okay, we're about 60 haven't, 40 have, okay. For the 40% of you who have, why is it that I can say it's Beriah or Beriog or Veriog? Bet and bet are the very same Hebrew letter. Looks the same, except for one thing, the little dot in the belly button. One has a, actually it's the B sound that has the belly button. I know some of you who've never taken Hebrew say, but it kind of looks like this. It's got belly button, and vet does not. It's just kind of like this and no belly button. Listen, I learned that in Hebrew school. That's how we learned how to tell the difference between vet and vet. But therefore, understand it's really the very same Hebrew word. So similar names to Beriog were Baragos, Verigu, and Veriog. Now here's what's interesting. These names were applied to the Vikings. V-I-K-I-N-G-S. How many have ever heard of the Vikings? They're real. They were a real people group. And these names were names applied to the Vikings. In other words, Varagos, Varagu, and Variag, Vikings, who went into Russia. So now again, we're seeing what? Migrating north into Russia. So then there was a related people, were the Varakon Huns, Huns. They were related. Remember I said these people keep intermarrying, and they were among the Khazars in Russia. I remember many of the Khazars later converted to Judaism. Another related group were the Varans, and that should be or Warings. That's not of, that's or. And I'll admit to that one, that was probably a typo. And they came with the Anglo and Saxons. And I'm going to stop again, and I'm going to keep pounding this in, because we know the Anglo and Saxons were what? They were people groups from Isaac. Okay? So they are what? They're brethren to these people, and they're related. So then you got the Varans or Warings who came with the Angles and Saxons. They didn't know, they just joined with them. Again, I want to show you something. Asher, the tribe of Asher, banding together, union, coming together. And so when they came in contact with the Angles and Saxons as they're migrating, they seemed to have this need to band together with them. And so they came with the Angles and Saxons to Britain, and that there's Britain should be next to 2. And actually it was supposed to be a fill-in, and for some reason the computer took out the line for you to fill it in, and I didn't catch it till after they were all printed. So my apologies to you. So where you see came with the Anglo and Saxons to, there should be a line there, Britain, Britain. And when these people groups, the Varans, Warings, Angles, and Saxons came to Britain, they conquered the Celtic Brigantes, which, by the way, was another family group. Definitely a family group. I mean, that was their family member. They didn't know they were family members. They just conquered them. Because the Brigantes were also descended from Beriah, son of Asher. So again, you have a people group, another brother. And they were located in northern England, in Gaul, modern-day France, in East Switzerland, and in southeast Ireland. So again, I want to keep pulling these strings and make this tapestry. So these people groups from Asher went into different places at different times. And some went into northern England, some into Gaul, some into Switzerland, some into Ireland. But eventually, guess what? They're all coming and basically settling very close together. And not only are they settling close together, but if you will look at a map of where their land allotments were when they first came into the Promised Land, very close. If you will look at where they went in Europe and where they were settled in their land allotments, it's very interesting. They're very much, it's like laying kind of on top of each other where they gathered together. So he said, I'll scatter you, and you'll go at different times, and you'll take different routes, but I'm going to put you where I want you. So descendants of the tribes of Asher are found in different regions and are identifiable with various people groups. So these included the Vandals, who were known as the Ligi. Their main divisions were the Boroi. I'm just going to do this because I cannot put the proper sound of the E before the O. So it's Boroi, Imani, and the Haisi. And these groups were descendants of Asher's son, Beriah, B-E-R-I-A-H, Jimnah, Ishua, I-S-H-U-A-H, and Iswi. Any questions? Okay, Beriah, B-E-R-I-A-H, and then of course Jimnah. Ishua is I-S-H-U-A-H, and Iswi. You're welcome. And these were once part of a Celtic culture. And we've already studied other tribes that we know were part Celtic. Others from Asher, such as the Veneti, V-E-N-E-T-I, guess what? They had also been subject to Celtic influence. Again, different ways of coming in, different times, different associations, but they also were influenced by the Celtic. I will say that the Celtics came to Christianity very early, and I don't mean to punch a pin in your balloon on this, but they had received Christianity. The Celtics had received Christianity long before St. Patrick went to Ireland. I just thought I'd let you know that. That doesn't, I'm not in any way denigrating what he did when he went there, but a group of people, a little band of people that you are probably very familiar with reading about in the New Testament got there long before St. Patrick, so I'll just do that, throw that there. A group of Vandals who assisted the Anglo-Saxons in invading Britain in the 450s AD. So we know that there was a group of Vandals who assisted, and the ecclesiastical historian Bede, he was a historian. He was, when I say ecclesiastical, as you remember, that was a word that we were kind of having trouble with. I was having trouble communicating on Sunday morning. I was screaming, by the way, if you were in service Sunday, I was screaming it at the top of my lungs. You just couldn't hear it. But I did get it. Ecclesiasticism. Okay. The acoustics in this sanctuary are not good unless you have a mic on. So just so you know, I was trying. Okay. So in Ecclesiastical History, Book 4, Chapter 9. So if you want to, it's out there. I think it's online. You can look for it there. Otherwise, you probably would have to go to probably Malone University's library to find this. And they meant this book. His book mentions the Rugini people among the Anglo-Saxon forces. So in his book, he mentions that there were a group of Rugini. They were a people group, and they were seen among the Anglo-Saxon forces who invaded Britain in the 450s AD. And the Rugini were a Vandal group. V-A-N-D-A-L. Now what's interesting about this, he's just writing a history. He says, and it mentions that in with these forces, there were a people group called the Rugini. Well, it just so happens there's an island of Rugen, R-U-G-E-N. And by the way, in Hebrew, that would be R-G-N. And so would Rugini be R-G-N. And this island of Rugen in the Baltic Sea is, guess what? Named after them. Now think about it. You go all the way to the Baltic Sea, and now you're all the way over here in Britain with the Anglo-Saxons invading Britain. And here's this people whose island, Rugen, in the Baltic Sea was named after them. How did they get there? How did the Rugini get there? Well, they migrated. They were exiled to the east, and then they began to migrate north. And they were by the Baltic Sea, and they kept moving. Why? Because God moved them. He said, I will do this. The names Rugini, Roga, and Rugen in connection with the Vandals comes from Roga, son of Shomer, son of Heber, Heber, son of Beriah, Beriah, guess what? Son of Asher. It comes from Asher. And First Chronicles, and that's all we're going to get tonight. I know I've probably, anybody's head spinning. Again, the only thing I want you to remember is God's moving these people. And he doesn't, do you understand? They don't even get in some weird, somebody's way over here and this people group out of the same tribe is way over here. No, they end up, how many know that's not accidental? You know, it's not just God taking the tribes and putting in his hand and going, I don't care where you land. It's all a part of his plan. And it's a part of his plan throughout history. And we saw it as we finished up last week, and we were looking at people whose names we have heard in history. You know, and we looked at some of these individuals, and God placed these individuals, descendants of someone who just played key roles in saving, unknown to them, but unsaving family members. It's very interesting. So I'm going to end by reading First Chronicles. First Chronicles chapter 7. First Chronicles chapter 7, verse 30. The sons of Asher were Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and their sister Surah. And you can see there the Beriah, because we're saying it went all the way back to Beriah, son of Asher. And we know the Rugini came from him. The sons of Beriah were Heber, and Malchiel, who was the father of Berzaeth. And Heber begot Japhlet, Shomer, Hophnim, and their sister Shua. And I will simply say, Shua will also be a leader of a clan of Asher. So we're going to pick up next week with Beriah and his two sons, and where they went, and then where they went, and where they went, and where they went, and the key is there are going to be characteristics, tribal characteristics. How many can remember, as when we looked at what Israel said to his sons, what Moses said to the tribes, and then you look at them, even in modern times, where they end up as the preeminent people group in a nation, and see the characteristics of that nation. And we see it. We've seen it with the tribe, particularly of Manasseh, where the predominant descendants of Manasseh are, which is the United States of America. We see the predominant characteristics of the tribe of Ephraim in the United Kingdom, because the predominant tribal group, I'm not saying everybody is, but the predominant tribal group that gives its nature and characteristic to a nation is coming from them. And you're going to see it, and we've seen it in the other tribes and where they ended up. Remember all the things we looked at in France about Reuben? Reuben's characteristics show up in the French people, and even their reputation to this day. So and we'll see it with Asher as well as we get further along. Okay. Thank you for joining us online from wherever you joined us. Don't forget, as you give, you help us to be able to produce these and get these out. It takes a crew. It takes somebody who works the camera. It takes somebody who will upload and get that out there, and sometimes need be splicing things and doing all that. And I can't do that. I do what I can do, but they do the splice. Sometimes we've had to actually do some pulling things together. But they do all of that work. Thank you so much for your support, and I know some of you are just faithful every month to support this as you're watching at home. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you that it matters to you that this goes out. And thank you for stopping and spending this time with us as we trace the tribes. This is not just a history lesson, but I hope what it does in your heart and life is to give you such a confidence that God has a plan for your life. He knows where you are. And if you've read it, he said he even has the hairs on your head numbered. That means that's how intimately he is concerned in your life. And understand how he took the sons of Israel and their descendants, and he said, I'm going to scatter you. And he did, and he said, you're going to be a blessing. And they have been. And then he says something, and I believe it with all my heart. He said, I will whistle for you, and I will bring you back to your land. And that day is soon to come. And I think but I will tell you this, it's sooner today than it was yesterday. So every day we are coming closer and closer to that ingathering of all of his people. All of his people. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting ready for my tribal allotment. The Lord bless you. If you have a prayer request, if you have a comment or a question, please either write me a note and send it, or you can drop it off in the drop box in the lobby of the church, or you can mail it in the old-fashioned way. We will get it. We appreciate it. Thank you for those of you who have been mailing your questions and your comments and your offerings in. I see every one of them, and before it even goes to accounting. So thank you. Thank you for your prayers for this class. And I pray that you have an awesome weekend, and we'll be looking at you from this same place next week.